Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you my most anticipated horror and thriller releases for 2023. This is coming out perhaps a little bit early, but not really because the books have been announced for the first half of the year, so I thought it was about time that I filmed this. I'm going to include cover art wherever possible, but some of these covers haven't been let out at the time I'm editing this, so keep that all in mind. And I'm going to base this off of Canadian release dates, so North American, but of course even with that, these dates are subject to change, so don't be too hard on me if I'm incorrect. And on that note, I will say that I'm going to do my best to give you a basic synopsis, but it's really hard for me to summarize a book I haven't read yet, so if I'm wrong on that count too, please don't be too hard on me. But these are 20 books that I think are going to be fantastic, or at least I hope they will, and so I want to put them all on your radar so that you can request them from your library, you can pre-order them, or simply just put them on your Goodreads TBR. All that being said, let's actually get into the books, and of course, yes, I do have a similar video coming for science fiction. I just haven't had a chance to film it yet because I'm still waiting on a few catalogs to be announced. But otherwise, let's get started here. Now, starting in January, we have Bad Cree by Jessica John, and this is a book that follows a young Cree woman who every night has terrible nightmares about her sister who had an untimely death. She wakes up and believes that she has a crow's head in her hands, but it quickly disappears. And so it's a question of, are these simply dreams or do they mean more? And then she decides to go and travel back home to revisit her family and deal with the grief that she ran away from. Now, I'm excited for this book for a few reasons. One, the fact that it sounds like it's Canadian based, which you know I love as a Canadian myself. It's also a piece of Indigenous fiction, Indigenous horror fiction, and I love things like books involving Stephen Graham Jones and other Indigenous authors, so I'm really hopeful this will be a new favorite of mine. And I think it's just going to be very topical. I understand that dreaming is a very major or important part of a lot of Cree and other Indigenous cultures, and so I think it's going to be woven into the story and hopefully will be just a really creepy good narrative. And yeah, very excited and very hopeful for this one. Next, we have The Nightmare Man by J.K. Marquette, and this is a book that follows a best-selling novelist who goes off to write in this old mansion, and he is known for writing these incredible horror, thriller, crime fiction novels, and of course when he is there, a terrible murder takes place and a detective is going to investigate and notices that the details of the crime happen to match the details of his book, and while it begins to implicate the novelist, perhaps he, the writer himself, is the cause of these deaths, and the story goes from there. This one just sounds fun. I am a sucker for the idea of reality mirroring fiction. I know it's something that's been done before, it's kind of a familiar trope in thrillers and horror, but I don't mind. I love reading it over and over again, and that being said, I don't actually feel like I've read it that many times, so definitely one that I'm interested to check out, and I hope it lives up to its potential. Then we have How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, which probably a lot of you know is coming out this coming year and are really excited to check out. This story follows a set of siblings whose parents have passed away during the pandemic, and so they are left to deal with their possessions. Specifically, the only thing they actually own is this old house, and so the siblings, because of the economic situation happening, are now trying to get rid of the house, but well, possibly it is haunted, and the story goes from there. I will admit that Grady Hendrix is not always a 5-star read for me, but I also think that his work is so important in modern fiction right now because he is really bringing horror into the popular genre and really making it so beloved because of the fact that he really is self-aware of the tropes of the genre. He turns them on their head and just tells stories in a way that are both satirical but also a little bit terrifying at the same time. His narrative just never quite hit the mark for me, but I'm always hoping his next one will just be in that sweet spot, and this one has a fantastic premise. I don't love haunted house stories, but I know that Grady Hendrix is going to do it right, and I'm really excited to check this one out. Then we have Hallows by Christopher Golden, and this is a horror book that is pitched as being for those of you, including myself, that love Stranger Things. This book is set on Halloween in 1984 and follows a small town that is preparing for Halloween. However, they are all terrified for some reason because of this mysterious, cunning man that they are aware of that is haunting their town. And yeah, I love nostalgic fiction, especially set in the 1980s. I love Stranger Things, and this one definitely definitely has some potential. I've read several of his books and he tends to be a pretty good storyteller, so I'm definitely excited to check out Christopher Golden's newest release. And yeah, I hope it doesn't disappoint because that premise sounds fantastic. Then we have 13 Episodes by Craig DeLuey, and this is a horror book that follows a film crew that gets permission to film a reality TV show in a supposedly haunted house. And in this film crew, we have a husband and wife team that are leading the production, and they are going to investigate. The husband really wants to use his scientific techniques to prove that the house is haunted, and well, the story goes from there. This one I'm really excited for because, again, I don't typically love haunted house stories, but my favorite do tend to be the ones involve investigating a haunted house, because as a skeptic, I think that a lot of times it appeals to me. And it just sounds really fun. I love that it's an ultra-modern setting and of course plays into our culture's obsession with reality TV. And I'm hoping it's gonna have nods to things like Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. I've read Craig DeLuey before and I'm hoping that this will be a new favorite of his because yeah, that premise sounds fantastic and I really hope that it delivers. Let's jump on the hype train once again. Then we have Vampire Weekend by Mike Chen, which is probably a bit of a cheat to put on this list because I'm guessing from the synopsis that it's gonna read more like urban fantasy than horror, but you know what, it is vampire, so I'm putting it on the list because I do want to check it out. This story follows a vampire that is living in the modern day, and you find out within this world that a lot of the myths around vampires are not true, but they do live very long lives, and so because of that they have watched many years of punk rock shows, but that genre isn't that old, so I don't really get why they're saying that in the synopsis. But essentially this is a vampire that loves punk rock, and one day their teenage lover from many years ago reconnects with them, and the story goes from there. I don't even know why I'm putting this on this list. You can give me some hate, but I really like Mike Chen's previous work, which tends to be more science fiction and fantasy, and so I do want to check this one out. And again, because it's vampires, I'm hoping it has a little bit of horror to it. I'm hoping it's a little bit gruesome, and at the very least I'm hoping that it plays into a lot of the horror and vampire tropes, or at least makes fun of them. It's not my favorite genre, but I do enjoy books that kind of make fun of it at this point, because it is one that in my mind is getting to be a little bit exhausted. So yeah, I'm curious to check it out. I'm hoping it hits the mark, but either way I'll let you know and get back to you with a review. Then we have Our Share of Night by Mariana Enríquez, and I'm hoping I didn't butcher that name too much. This is an Argentina horror author that I previously read through her short story collection, so I'm very excited for her to come back with an actual novel because I do have a preference for longer fiction. In this story, we follow a young woman whose father had the ability to communicate with the dead, and now I believe as he's either getting older or has passed away, this community is now reaching out to her to take his place. And it sounds like supernatural horror, which isn't always my thing, but again, I had such a good experience with that short story collection of hers, which again is kind of rare for me because I rarely pick up short stories anymore, but it was so good that I broke my own rule and read it, and I'd really like to see what she can do in the longer form, so I'm hoping that this one really works well for me. Then we have Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones, which is a sequel to his previous slasher book, and in this one we follow Jade once again, who is returning back to her home reserve on the day that the killer has broken loose and is going out to continue or finish his killing spree. And so this is a book that is very much a nod to slashers, but particularly slasher sequels. So knowing Stephen Graham Jones, I suspect is going to be very on the nose and make a lot of nods and winks to the popular sequels out there. I liked but did not love the first book, so I am a little bit nervous to go into the second one, but I'm hoping that I will enjoy all the meta references and that will carry me along. And again, as I said before, I really do love Indigenous-based fiction, which this is obviously going to be. So I'm just hoping that it really hits the mark and it's just what I'm looking for when it comes out, and it kind of works for me at that time. All that being said, I bet a lot of you are really excited to check it out, and I'm sure it's already on a lot of your Goodreads lists. Then we have The Spite House by Johnny Compton, and this is a book that follows a man who is on the run with his two young daughters, and because he is on the run, he really can't go and have a proper reference for a job. He really is trying to hide his identity, and so it's making it hard for him to find work and of course provide income for his family. And so because of that, he ends up taking a super sketchy job. He basically works as a caretaker for these people that want him to take care of their mansion, but not just take care of it, but actually look for paranormal activity. And yes, once again, this is a haunted house story that is focused on searching for paranormal activity and trying to prove that ghosts are real. And so this definitely sounds like the type of haunted house story that might work for me. I love the setup, the idea of a father on the run. The synopsis leaves it kind of vague as to why he's on the run, so I don't know exactly what the cause of that, if his wife is in the picture or was. And so I'm really excited to see it. I'm hoping that it's going to have a strong family angle, but also hopefully appeal to those of you like myself that are skeptics and are looking for a haunted house story that's going to be hopefully a little bit different. Then we have Mothered by Zoe Stage, and this is a book that follows a woman who reluctantly has her own mother move in with her. This is at a bad economic time, so she really needs the extra money to help pay with the mortgage, but she has a difficult relationship with her mother, and sure enough, as soon as they move in, they start to fight and old wounds start to open up. The mother also discovers that the daughter catfishes people online for fun and unsurprisingly does not approve of this habit, and the story goes from there. This is one that kind of sounded like an average book, but the author is so popular for her previous book, Baby Teeth, which honestly didn't entirely work for me. But I do want to check this one out, and for whatever reason, the fact that catfishing is included in the synopsis just really appeals to me. I'm just not quite sure why it's written in the story. I hope that it fits the narrative and makes sense. Honestly, I may not even love this one, but I just have to find out what is happening and report back with a review. Now, moving on to March, we have Piñata by Leopoldo Gout, and this is a book that I thought was going to come out in 2022, but obviously it's on this list, so it must have gotten postponed. And this is a story that I'm very excited for. It's probably one of my highest anticipated releases on this list because of the fact that this author also wrote Ghost Radio, which is one of my all-time favorite horror books. So in this story, we follow a mother who is living in New York, but goes to Mexico to work on a job. I believe she's in charge of a construction project on a older Mexican building that is being refurbished. However, there is a terrible accident and something goes wrong. I believe someone dies and she gets fired from her job. She was living there temporarily with her daughters, and so they return back to New York together. However, something possibly followed them home from Mexico and is possibly now possessing one of her daughters. I love possession stories, and again, I have such a strong love for this author's previous work that I think this one could be right up my alley. And I've really connected with a lot of Mexican-based stories, so I'm really hoping that this one will work for me really well. And the setup sounds good, the premise is just up my alley, and yeah, I really hope that this one will end up on my favorites for 2023. And then we have Red Queen, which is supposed to be the next really big, buzzy international bestseller. And so this book follows a young woman who is a amazing forensic detective. However, because of something that's happened in her past, she's also a bit of a homebody, or specifically has fear of going outside. So I think she's an agoraphobic, and is just very much in her own space, but she is a brilliant mind who can make incredible connections, and so she's able to still solve cases, and it's just supposed to be kind of our next answer to those of us that love Elizabeth Salander. So very excited for this one. It's getting so much buzz online. I've seen so many advertisements for it really early in 2022, so the marketing is getting pushed really hard, which either means that it's going to be amazing or we're all going to be super let down. Let's hope that's not the case. I'm definitely eager to check this one out for myself, and I am hopeful that it will work for me. Then we have House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher, and this is a horror book that follows a woman who is getting very worried about her mother. After the passing of her grandmother, who was very eccentric, her mother is starting to act the same way, and she is just going about doing a lot of strange things, including just redoing their house in some sort of really strange way. And so it sounds like possibly the house is possessed, or maybe the mother herself. And I'm definitely intrigued because T. Kingfisher just writes really unique horror books. They're not always necessarily 5-star reads for me because they are more funny than horrifying in my opinion, but I love that she writes horror that is a little bit more humorous and just has, again, kind of a satirical look at the genre. She really plays with the tropes of it and turns them on their head and just does things that other authors don't. And so I'm definitely curious to check this one out and see how it lands. Again, haunted house books aren't really my thing, but in her hands, I know it's going to be something a little bit different. and not as predictable as another author might write. Then in April, we have The Insatiable Volt Sisters by Rachel Eve Moulton. And this is a horror thriller that follows sisters. I believe it's told over a few different timelines. So we have the past, the 1980s, when these sisters are growing up on this remote island. They are as thick as thieves. They are strong siblings with this insatiable bond. However, you find out that their parents are separating and they are really torn apart by the falling apart of their family. And then we follow them in the present day where they are returning back to the place that they lived on this remote island. There's been a death in the family and now they have to revisit everything again. I know it's kind of a vague synopsis, that's all I really understand about this one, but it does have a lot of pieces that really interest me. I love that nostalgic aspect, that coming of age, specifically a female coming of age narrative always grabs my attention, and just bringing up old memories, having to revisit the past. It has a lot of potential. I've seen a lot of books like this, but I'm always looking for one that will just, again, hit the mark perfectly and definitely has potential to be a favorite if it does it right. Then we have Blind Spots by Thomas Mullen, and this is a speculative thriller that I'm really excited about. The premise is that we follow this pandemic or virus that caused everyone to go blind. However, in this future, they've created technology to allow people to essentially see through this technology. However, there's a question of whether the technology itself is filtering what people see or manipulating their technological vision. And so within the story, we follow a detective who is investigating crimes, and the story goes from there. I just really like the idea of that because you take pandemic fiction and then you place a mystery thriller right in the middle of the story. And it's really an intriguing premise because there is kind of the talk of ideas about, different technology that might allow us to send images to our brain, even if our eyes are not able to visually see what's out there. But then there's always the question of, well, what if you manipulate that? What if you change what people see and are kind of putting some kind of filter over that, or changing things, or causing things, of course, to be blind, to have these blind spots where people are certainly not seeing everything that's out there. I think it's a super cool idea, and I really hope that this book doesn't disappoint because that sounds amazing. Then we have Sisters of the Lost Nation, which is an Indigenous thriller horror novel that follows a young Native American woman who is living with her people on reserve. And within the community, a lot of women have started to disappear, which is super topical given current events, at least here in Canada, and I assume it's the same in the States. But essentially, we follow her as she's trying to investigate what is happening, especially when her own sister disappears. And you find out that this young woman appears to have some kind of supernatural sight. She perhaps sees monsters or mythological creatures that others do not. And I think the premise sounds really good. Again, I think it's super topical with some great themes surrounding missing Indigenous women, which is something that does not get talked about a lot. So I suspect this book is going to be super powerful, and I just hope that it delivers. The cover looks amazing, and I really want to love this book, and I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being a favorite of the year. Then we have The Haunting of Njanda by V. Castro, which is probably a title I just horribly, brutally mispronounced, so apologies for that, but I'm very excited for it, so I couldn't skip it over the list just to avoid any embarrassment as an English reader. But essentially, this follows a woman who is of Mexican descent, and within her culture, she is a mother and a wife, but there's something more to her. It sounds like she has some hidden past, and perhaps is like the reincarnation of some sort of Mexican goddess or something. I don't know. It's one of these books where I honestly don't want to know too much about it, which makes it kind of obnoxious to put on this list, but it sounds amazing. I've loved V. Castro's previous work, which tends to be strong, fierce, feminist literature that's written all around Mexican culture in an own voices narrative, and I just expect this book to be really powerful, really incredible, and again, super high potential to be a favorite. Then we have Graveyard of Lost Children by Katrina Monroe, and this is a story that follows a woman who as a baby was almost murdered by her own mother because she believed her to be a changeling. However, she survived and has grown to adulthood where she has gotten pregnant and is now about to give birth to her own daughter, and of course she's worried that history is going to repeat itself, and she just has a really complicated, troubling relationship with her own daughter, who appears to be just perhaps not quite the perfect baby that she expects it to be. This book I'm expecting to deal with a lot of postpartum depression. I think it's going to be a really good book that's going to challenge the narrative of traditional motherhood and just challenge the role of women, and specifically just that natural bond we're all supposed to have to our children. So I'm hoping this book is going to be super topical. I love books that involve motherhood that are just a little bit gray or complicated, and I'm hoping that this book will really deliver because that premise sounds fantastic. Then in July we have Camp Domestic by Chuck Tingle, and this is a book that is set in a Pray Away the Gay camp, essentially a gay conversion camp hosted by one of these ultra-conservative Christian communities. And of course, within the story we follow a queer young woman who is sent off to this camp. She is reluctant to go because it's terrible, but also because when she is there she sees some sort of entity in the woods, and so perhaps there is a greater monster going on. But I'm just really excited for this one. It actually sounds really similar to a book I've already read called Camp Carnage, which I loved, and so I'm really happy to have a book that is once again going to shed light on these despicable camps and hopefully have some really harsh commentary, and hopefully at the end have a really good horror story that is going to be a lot of fun and really bring back the power to the queer community within horror fiction. So I'm really excited for this one, and that's why it's on the list. And last, coming out in August, we have Cuckoo by Gretchen Felker Martin, and this is a horror story that doesn't actually have a synopsis at the time of recording this, but the basic tagline is that it's a cheerleader story that is mixed with Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So what I'm expecting is a Mean Girl story that is going to also have trans own voices representation, and it sounds amazing. I love Mean Girl stories, and while I didn't completely love Manhunt, the biggest reason for that was simply the fact that I don't love post-apocalyptic fiction. This one sounds much more up my alley, and I'm very excited for it, and I can't wait for the cover reveal because I think it's going to be super fun knowing the author's previous cover. So looking forward to that one. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? What is your most anticipated horror or thriller release for 2023? I know it seems far away, but honestly it's coming up really fast and the arcs are going to be starting to come out. My intention is to read and review as many of these books for you, and as always I'm going to give you my super honest opinions. I'm known for a lot of unpopular opinions on here, so I'm not afraid to not like a book even if it does come from a publisher. I'm not afraid of that at this point. And if you want to help me out with this video, I'd love if you would share it around online. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts on upcoming releases, remember I have a science fiction video that will be coming soon, so please subscribe if you want to stick around for that. And if you want to help me out with this video, you can give me a thumbs up, share it around online, other places if people want to hear about more books coming out this year. And if you want to drop a comment, even if just a little emoji, that helps me out too. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you won't miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.